So I'm Charles Meyer, and we're here for official video number 3. From the last video, I had the centers powder coated. Well, I think you saw the centers powder coated from the last video, but now I basically have the front suspension mocked up. So I've got the spindle roughed in, I've got the brakes kind of roughed in, and this is the whole assembly. This is basically what it's going to look like. I'm going to take it apart for a minute and show you all the individual pieces. So these are knockoff hubs. So this particular side turns left-hand thread. It's a super snug fit. So we machined these actually in LA. Lyco Machining did this, but we designed and drew everything here in Hayward, and then had these machined. So this is to copy that Lola in the sense of look, trying to have a little bit of British spirit going on here. And then, so here's the Wilwood Rotor and Hat that fit on the sprint car. This is actually a 6-pin hub, but I'm just using 3 in the front, and I may end up using 3 in the back. The back end of the car is going to be the drive side, and it takes more load, but I think with the weight of the vehicle, probably these 3 pins are going to be sufficient. So this is the AP caliper, also British theme going on here. These are off a previous project, so I'm reusing them, but we just rebuilt them, so they're in good shape. I got all new O-rings and rebuilt that. So this is the hub. This is actually all sprint car knockoff style hub. Then this is the custom spindle, and it looks really funny because if you've seen spindles before, they probably don't look anything like this. But this is essentially a sheet metal version to get us all the pickup points. So we want the lower ball joint here, upper ball joint here, kingpin angle to be, you know, what we want it to be. This actual front snout, this is one of the snouts. This is for the other side that isn't welded up yet, but these are from our drop spindles that we sell at Meyer Racing. So it's a good size bearing, as you can see, which is probably going to be way overkill for this Mini. But NASCAR ball joints. So these are heavy duty ball joints. So I'm not at all going for a lightweight, light component car, but this ultimately is going to have gusseting. We're going to drill some holes in it to take some weight out where we don't need the weight, but it's kind of cool that we're on the way. And in future episodes of this video program, I'm going to have Damian Hardy, who's a friend of mine who has worked at ProDrive, who's helping us with the pickup points for the suspension and helping us design this spindle, for example. I'll bring him on to explain his theory on the suspension and what we're doing and why. Then over here, it's actually, there's going to be more discussion in the next video, but I hope by the next week or two to have the rear spindles done as well. So this is both sides. I'm waiting for some tubing to be machined. This is the other side of the front, and in about 2 weeks I'll have everything done so we can start actually mocking up the car and put the suspension on the car to get it rolling. And this particular, not necessarily month because we're not doing it every month, but this particular session, we have built a full carbon fiber front end since the last video. I'm working on making a roof rack, so I'm setting up the points there, getting ready to weld in the tabs. We're working on flares. We added some structure to the underside of the roof to give it some strength. We'll show you some clips of that. We added some structure to the back side of the car. We added fiberglass as well as carbon fiber to the inside of the shell to add some strength back in because we cut a lot of strength out. So I want to talk about this nose for a second. Essentially what we did is we had the car full steel front end to begin with, and we bonded in the steel hood with the fenders And I didn't really have a bumper and I didn't have anything below the bumper. So ultimately what we did is on the original steel front end, we masked off all the lines, we filled it all in, we took a mold and then we made a part. And so this is essentially my own version of a bumper shape that I like. And this is the beginning of our spoiler. And then eventually we're gonna have a short, maybe 1-inch flat carbon fiber plate splitter that'll go past here. We ended up making 3 nose sections to get this nose. The first one came out pretty good, but the weave was slightly distorted. The second one, we had some chemistry issues where the skin looks like an alligator, and so that kind of ruined the second one. And then this one being the third one came out really, really nice. So pretty much there's a couple tiny imperfections of resin that we'll be able to ultimately clean up, but we're gonna keep this raw carbon fiber front end, and we're ultimately going to put flares on and paint the sides of the car, and the sides of the flares probably all red, but you're gonna see a big portion of the front end of this all nice and carbon fiber and nice exposed look. So for those of you that are interested to know a little bit about the nose, the full carbon fiber front end without the flares, just right out of the mold, was 27 or 28 pounds, right around there. And the steel pieces that we cut off of the front end weighed a little over 50, so it saved about half the weight. And part of the reason that that's the case is because I added a lot of weight into the bumper. I put a lot of material into the bumper thinking that if I bumped into anybody, I want a little more structure there. So I didn't ultimately try to make the lightest part possible. The front end has a lot of foam in it as well, and wood in the bumper. Lightweight balsa, but nonetheless. So the other thing about the nose is that we're trying to make some flares that will fit these 16 by 9 3/4 wheels. It's a 16-245 tire. And I'm trying to do it where we maintain some of the rounded shapes that are in the car without doing something really boxy. We started with foam over the top of the tire. To get the ultimate clearance, we need about 3 inches of bump. So if the tire were to come up into the wheel well about 3 inches, that we've got enough clearance there. And we're also gonna have to work a little bit on the rotation of the wheels. So once I get the front suspension on here, I can perfect how much clearance I've got for the flare. But first thing we did was put foam on here. Next thing is fiberglass over the top of the foam. We'll shape and do the body work next. We'll primer it and then ultimately buff that, pull a mold off, and then cut these away, make carbon fiber flares, put them back on the car. So I have this idea that I want to put a roof rack on here. So with the rear end, these cars don't normally have a rear end, so I'm taking up some of the space in the back trunk area. And I'm gonna have a fuel tank in the back as well, so that's gonna take up some space. So I'm actually gonna build a roof rack that's gonna go on here. So I'm in the process, I've got these bungs that are threaded, and I'm gonna go ahead and weld these into place here, and then ultimately set up a carbon fiber rail, 2 carbon fiber rails with Brazilian hardwood slats. So I don't know, I'm gonna end up putting some wood into this car and kind of maintain some of the British design and British spirit, but we're gonna do a steering wheel that's gonna be carbon fiber and Brazilian hardwood. We're gonna do side skirts that are gonna be carbon fiber and Brazilian hardwood. And then the roof rack will be carbon fiber with Brazilian hardwood. So we'll see how that all plays out, but I'm looking forward to it. Actually, this week I'm getting the paint, so the red paint, it's gonna be Jupiter red from the Mercedes color. I think it's a current color that they're using, but we get that tomorrow. So we're gonna start throwing some color on this thing pretty soon and get into the next step. In the other video, the car was upside down and the entire bottom portion of the car was essentially cut off, open and exposed. And I welded in basically 3/16 flat plate all on the bottom side of the car, and then I welded in some 1¼ inch square tubing both front and back to add some stability to the shell. So when we clamp this thing down, we bolt it down ultimately to the carbon fiber chassis, we've got a little bit more integrity to the sheet metal shell. And I welded all along the bottom here, stitch welded it, and I also welded along the outside. So now I've got something nice and secure and flat to build on. Okay, Another aspect, the last video, video number 2, we had the entire car upside down, and what we were working on was the headliner. So the entire inside, we basically went and filled with foam all along all the gaps on the inside, and then we sealed it off with a carbon fiber mulch. And then from there, we went and sanded it and primered it and just gave it a nice smooth finish. So ultimately it's gonna get painted. It'll all be painted the same red color. But did that. We also added a bunch of material inside, like inside the rear pillars, inside here, underneath this rear tray or rear window. And ultimately it's got carbon fiber and fiberglass both. And my thinking is that because I cut out a bunch of sheet metal, I'm trying to add some strength back in. So my thinking right now with the car is something kind of unique and different. And I think at the end of the day, it's all gonna play out all right. But I don't wanna put a roll cage in this, and yet at the same time, I'm very sensitive to safety. I really wanna make sure that if this car flips upside down, that there's some integrity to it. So I'm ultimately gonna box in these portions and add a lot of strength to the roof and the idea of it getting upside down. And if the car were to get rear-ended right now, there's more than sheet metal behind here. So it's all fiberglass as well as carbon fiber in these areas. And then up underneath here, we put in a nice flat carbon fiber plate. I've got balsa wood here, and ultimately we're gonna put a carbon fiber plate across the top here. And this entire section is gonna be really, really stiff and secure to be able to hold the push rod rear coilover setup that's gonna essentially sit right here in the rear window. So you'll see that in the next video or the second. This rear end that's in place right here is made by Speedway in Los Angeles. It's actually all aluminum, quick change rear end for independent rear suspension. So it's really a pretty cool setup, and you can see here that this is kind of how it's going to come together. We're going to end up making our own axles, but this is basically where the wheel's going to live, and we're just kind of trying to figure out where all the different components are going to go. If you ultimately pull this plate off later, there's 2 gears here you can change out, and you can change the gear ratios really simply. I don't really know that anybody else has done this, and perhaps some people out there might laugh at me for doing it, but I'm going with this idea of putting carbon fiber right up against the back side of the sheet metal to add some stability to the part. So we'll see how that all plays out. I don't know, I've given a lot of thought to it, and I'm going for it. So those are some of the updates for today. I'm looking forward to the next chapter here and getting the flares done, getting the suspension roughed in here in the next month or 2, and doing the next video. So until then, subscribe to the channel and keep updated.